Story 1. He never broke in, but every night something moved. This happened to me in 2017, a few months after I moved into my first apartment alone. It was a small one-bedroom unit in a quiet, outdated complex in Spokane, Washington. Not run down, but lived in. My building was tucked away on a dead-end street that backed up into a strip of woods. Mostly older tenants, a few night shift workers like me, and it felt safe. That was the draw. At the time, I was working early morning shifts at a bakery, clocking in around 4:30 a.m., which meant I went to bed early. My schedule was strict, not by choice, but by necessity. I'd prep my lunch the night before, make coffee, check that the alarm was set, then shut everything down. Every night, the same rhythm: bathroom light off, kitchen light off, door locked, blinds closed, shoes by the door, and coffee mug left clean beside the machine. It became second nature. But about 6 weeks after I moved in, I started noticing things. Small things, not broken, not missing, just wrong. The first time I woke up and found the bathroom light on. I thought I must have forgotten, even though I clearly remembered flipping the switch. I stood there staring at the light for way longer than made sense. Then I brushed it off. People forget things. It happens. Then, 2 nights later, I woke up and the kitchen light was on, and the drawer next to the sink was open. Nothing inside was gone or moved, just the drawer itself, left open about 3 inches. I stood in the doorway for what felt like forever. The air felt wrong, stale in a way I couldn't name. I did a full walkthrough of the apartment. Doors locked, windows locked, nothing missing. Everything as it should be, except for that drawer. Still, I convinced myself it was stress. My shifts had been long, and I wasn't sleeping well. I told myself I was sleepwalking. I even looked it up online, read that people sometimes perform complex tasks in their sleep. I wanted that answer to be true. I needed it to be, but it kept happening. Always small, always specific. I'd wake up and find the soap in a different position. A dish I hadn't used sitting in the drying rack. My shoes facing the wrong way by the door. One morning the blinds were angled open, just enough to make me uncomfortable. I hadn't touched them. I started documenting everything. I took photos every night. Sink, doors, windows, light switches. I made a checklist. I'd double and triple check locks. I even taped a thread to the bottom of the sliding door. If it moved, I'd know. But the thread never broke. And the photos were the same, except for what was changed. What unsettled me most wasn't the changes. It was the consistency. Like someone knew my habits. Like they were trying not to disturb me, just mimic me, or maybe test how much I would notice. I brought it up to the property manager. She said no one had access to my unit. I asked about previous tenants. She just shrugged. People don't usually stay long, she said. That line stayed with me. Eventually, I bought a cheap indoor camera. Just one. I didn't have the budget for more. I placed it in the hallway facing the living room and left it recording while I slept. I didn't expect to find anything. Honestly, I hoped I wouldn't. The first 2 nights, nothing unusual. Then on the 3rd night, I reviewed the footage and saw it. At 2:08 a.m., the kitchen light came on. The frame didn't show the switch, but it caught the change in lighting, the shadows shifting across the hallway floor. Then the sound, footsteps, bare, soft, 1 step, then another. No one ever came into view. I froze the footage frame by frame, trying to catch something, but there was no figure, no body, just light. Then sound, then light again as the kitchen shut off 47 seconds later. I showed the clip to a friend. He said maybe the camera glitched or a neighbor's light came through the window, but I knew it was none of those things. The light switch was on the inside. The footsteps were inside. I moved the camera to the kitchen the next night, left all the lights off, and I didn't sleep. At 2:11 a.m. I heard it again, not from the camera, but from my bed. The faint click of the switch. I sat up, pulse hammering, and watched the hallway glow faintly around the corner. Then footsteps, same rhythm, same softness, but again, nothing on the footage except the glow and sound. Still no break-in, still no signs of forced entry, still nothing to prove I wasn't imagining it, except that something had changed again. This time, it was the fridge magnets. I had 3. Alphabet letters I'd found at a thrift store, H, E, and L. I'd placed them randomly when I moved in, but that morning, they were spelled out perfectly across the freezer door. H-E-L. I removed them, put them in a drawer, taped it shut. That was the night I stopped trying to understand. I slept with the light on after that. It didn't help, because even when I didn't hear anything, I'd still wake up to find something off. And that was worse. The digital clock by my bedside was one of those things I never thought twice about. It was just there. A glowing red 3:00 a.m., 4:22, 5:15, always faithful, always reliable. Until one morning, I noticed it said 6:47 a.m. When my phone said 6:53, a 6-minute gap, odd but not alarming, I figured I'd bumped a button. The next day, it was 11 minutes off, and I hadn't touched it. So I checked the footage. I had moved the camera into the bedroom 2 nights earlier, facing the corner, mostly for peace of mind. I didn't expect it to show much, but there it was. At 3:11 a.m., the hallway light turned on. Again, no body, just the glow. Then, 2 minutes later, the bedroom door creaked open. Nothing stepped inside. No shadow, no movement, but I heard the floor creak. Then, incredibly, the clock beside my bed flickered. Not off. Just a subtle shift, like a change in time settings. The footage caught the display changing by 2 minutes. The digits warped for a split second and jumped. I sat there replaying it, my stomach tightening. Then I saw something else. A smudge appear on the glass surface of the clock, like someone had touched it. I paused, zoomed in. There was no reflection of anyone in the clock's surface, but the outline of a finger, faint and oily, was there, index-sized, smudged downward. I showed the clip to the police. Their reaction was immediate. Must be a glitch. They didn't even finish watching. They called it lens distortion or reflection error. But that doesn't explain why the clock in real life was now 15 minutes slow. I wiped the smudge with alcohol, reset the clock, but the next morning, it was wrong again. Not slow this time, fast. By 8 minutes. I unplugged the camera after that. It didn't matter. Whatever was happening didn't need to be seen. That night I unplugged the clock too, but the next morning it was plugged back in. And the time, 2:14 a.m. That exact moment was now on every display. My microwave, my stove, my phone alarm changed in settings to go off at 2:14 instead of 4. Someone, or something, was selecting that time. I thought maybe I'd lost it. Maybe I'd been sleepwalking. I taped the doors again. I taped the plug itself to the wall. Next morning, the tape was cleanly slit. The plug reconnected. 2:14 a.m. I stayed up that night, phone in hand, coffee brewed, and I watched. At exactly 2:14 a.m., the power blinked, just 1 second, a flicker. The kind that resets everything in your house, clocks, timers, fans, but nothing reset, except the clocks. They all blinked 2:14 again, every single one. Then I smelled something I hadn't smelled in years. Lilac. My mother used to wear lilac lotion. She died in 2006. There was no one in the room. I started reading. Not ghost stories, psychology papers, terms like delusional parasitosis, living delusions, and one phrase that stuck with me, co-presence syndrome. It was described as the belief that someone else lives with you, invisibly, without interference or proof. But it wasn't always a delusion. In some cases it was real. Intruders who never steal, who sleep in attics, eat your food when you're gone, rearrange things slightly to mark their presence. The phrase chilled me. Someone who knows your routines and enters without leaving a trace. I thought about the lint in my laundry basket that wasn't mine, the milk that was lower than I remembered, the curtain that moved slightly, though the windows were closed. But the moment that confirmed it for me came one Sunday morning. I always wore the same perfume. Light citrus, subtle, only one spray on my neck before I left for work. But that morning I woke to the smell of it. Strong, lingering, and wrong. It was in the air before I had touched the bottle. It clung to my pillow. I checked the bottle. It had been used. The level had dropped. Someone had worn my perfume, and not the way I did. A single mist on the neck. It was heavy, smeared, like they didn't know how to wear it properly. Or maybe they just didn't care. To this day, I still don't know who it was. Nothing was ever stolen. No fingerprints, no evidence. The locks were fine. The landlord never found signs of forced entry. The police stopped coming after the third call. But I know what I felt. The silence inside that apartment was not empty. It was occupied. And every night, something moved. Story 2. He knew where I'd be, even before I did. This happened to me in 2019 during my second semester of college in Maryland. I was 21 at the time. I'd just moved out of the dorms into a small off-campus studio. Nothing fancy, but it was mine. It was the first time I felt independent. I didn't party much. I worked weekends at a bookstore downtown, and most of my nights were spent studying in quiet coffee shops or walking to campus libraries. I liked routine. I stuck to it. That's why I noticed when things started to feel predicted. It began with a text. It came from an unknown number while I was in the middle of a bio lab. I wasn't supposed to have my phone out, but I checked it anyway. "You're going to skip lunch today." I stared at the screen, confused. I hadn't told anyone that. Not out loud, not online, but it was true. I hadn't packed anything and didn't have time between classes. I figured it was just a prank, maybe someone from my building. I ignored it. An hour later, another message. "You'll take the side stairs in Gilman. It's faster." Again, true. I always used those stairs, mostly because they avoided the foot traffic in the main atrium. But now, it didn't feel like a quirk. It felt observed. I looked around before exiting class. Nothing unusual, just kids with earbuds, laptops, backpacks. I didn't reply. That night, I mentioned it to my roommate from freshman year during a FaceTime call. She said it was probably a friend messing around, or a marketing bot. They were getting creepy like that, she said. But I hadn't clicked anything, hadn't posted anything. My social media was practically dead. I hadn't updated my schedule anywhere, not even my shared calendar. Then came the third text. A day later. "Tonight you'll walk to the park before going home. You'll think it's your idea." That one stopped me, because that had been exactly my thought just minutes before, to walk through the small wooded park near campus instead of taking the main road. I hadn't said it out loud. I hadn't texted anyone. I hadn't even stood up yet. I didn't go to the park that night. I sat in the library until it closed, phone off, stomach in knots. I walked home with my keys between my fingers, checking every corner. At 2:04 a.m., a final message for the night. "It's okay. You'll go next time." I didn't sleep. I blocked the number. Then I deleted it. But the messages didn't stop. They just started coming from different numbers. Each one was the same pattern, not threats, not commands. Just quiet statements of what I was about to do, like someone was narrating a script I hadn't read yet. "You'll leave the study group early. You'll pretend you have a headache. You'll take the back exit, the one behind the parking garage. You won't tell your mom, not yet." And every single time, it was right. I stopped talking about it. I figured if I didn't feed it, it would stop. Instead, it got more specific. One Tuesday, the text said, "You'll wear the black hoodie. The one with the frayed cuff." I was still in pajamas, hadn't even opened my closet yet. I stared at my clothes for a full 5 minutes. Then I put on something else, a sweater I hadn't worn in months. 20 minutes later, walking across campus, I got a message. "The sweater makes you look unsure." I froze mid-step. I looked around. It was daylight, crowds, nothing unusual, but I'd never felt more naked in my life. After that, the messages stopped being guesses. They started referencing things I hadn't done yet but would. You won't turn in your chem assignment on time. You'll cancel the dentist appointment. I kept checking to see if I was being manipulated, pushed into decisions, but these weren't suggestions. They weren't even encouragements. They were accurate forecasts. I started skipping classes. I called out of work. I disconnected my router and bought a prepaid flip phone. Still, the messages came. On paper, nothing was happening. No threats, no harassment, just information. But that's what made it worse, because I began to feel like my choices didn't belong to me anymore. Someone else knew what I was going to do, and I was starting to believe them. It got harder to tell what was mine. I'd go to the store for toothpaste and come back with grapefruit juice, something I hadn't bought in years. I'd tell myself it was random. But the next morning, a message. You'll regret the juice. Too bitter for you now. I started tracking everything, writing down choices, making conscious decisions in ways I never had before, even for small things. But no matter what I wrote down, what I tried to plan, the messages stayed one step ahead. I changed routines, picked unfamiliar coffee shops, used cash. I deleted all my apps, bought a new laptop, even switched rooms with another tenant in the building. Still, the patterns continued. But they became less like surveillance and more like manipulation. Not just, you'll go here, but shifts in behavior, subtle, repetitive, guiding. I started texting friends I hadn't thought about in months, old classmates, former co-workers, not because I wanted to, but because their names would pop into my head, out of nowhere, and once I messaged them, the texts would come. He still lives in Seattle. You'll pretend you didn't know. She'll cancel dinner, but you won't mind. And again, it was all correct. At first I thought, maybe it's memory. Maybe I'm just more predictable than I realized. But that didn't explain what happened next. One afternoon, I was walking to the train. I had no plans, no destination. I wasn't thinking about anything, just air, sky, pavement. Then, without deciding, I turned down a side street, a tiny residential block. Quiet, nothing notable. Midway down, my phone buzzed. This isn't a detour, it's habit. I stopped walking because it wasn't a habit. I'd never been on that street before. But the word stuck. Habit. It implied something I didn't understand. That night I had a dream, not a nightmare, just images. A room with yellow walls, a red shoe, a broken lamp. And in the morning, I got this. You'll think the dream came from nowhere, but it didn't. My thoughts didn't feel like mine anymore, not just watched, steered, like something was nudging, guiding, not aggressively, not maliciously, but intimately, like a twin who shared my brain and wanted to see if I'd notice. And I did. But too late. I started researching again, not ghosts, not hacking, psychology. And that's when I found it, a term used in forensic behavioral studies, anticipatory manipulation. It was used to describe a certain kind of stalker, one who doesn't follow but predicts, not from supernatural ability, but from obsessive data tracking. Routine observation, mimicry, behavioral profiling. Cases had been documented. One woman had discovered a man living 3 floors above her had tracked her movements for nearly a year, not with cameras or trackers, but by observing patterns. Trash days, phone calls, walks, sleep. He knew where she'd be because she was predictable. And he'd trained himself to think like her. But mine was worse, because whoever this was, they weren't tracking. They were inside the patterns, creating them. Another article mentioned something called identity reduction, the slow erosion of autonomy through external prediction. The subject begins to believe they're being puppeteered, not through control, but anticipation. Eventually, it breaks the person's sense of self. I saw that phrase underlined in a paper. The subject will eventually lose confidence in choice. I already had. I started waiting for messages before making decisions. I didn't act until I saw the text, even if it was vague, even if it didn't come. Because if it didn't come, I panicked. I felt invisible until the message arrived, like a mirror hadn't been turned on yet. Then one night, There was silence. No messages, no predictions, no buzz, and I didn't know how to move. I sat on the floor, staring at my phone. I didn't eat. I didn't speak. I didn't blink. Then at 4:33 a.m., the screen lit up. "You froze." I cried for the first time in weeks because the message wasn't wrong. I hadn't done a single thing until it told me what I'd done. I went to the police that morning. They said there was no threat, no blackmail, no harassment. The texts were odd, yes, but not criminal. I asked if they could trace the numbers. They said they were all temporary VoIP reroutes, anonymous, disposable. The report was filed. That's all they could do. I went home. I didn't sleep for 2 days. On the third morning, I opened my door to find a note, handwritten, folded, placed carefully at my feet. No envelope, no signature, just one sentence. "You were never hard to predict." And that was the last message I ever received. But the silence is worse now because I don't know if it's over or if I've just become so predictable they don't need to say it anymore. Story 3. The breathing was coming from my attic, but no one was there. This happened to me in the winter of 2020, right after I moved into a rental house just outside of Boulder, Colorado. It was an off-campus lease, tucked between 2 forested ridgelines, private, quiet, and surprisingly cheap. I'd been looking for something isolated, somewhere to focus. I was finishing my thesis remotely, and solitude felt like a good idea at the time. The house was a single story, built in the 80s. 1 bedroom, a slanted living room with tall windows, a kitchen that barely fit 2 people. It had a narrow attic with a fold-down ladder in the hallway, the kind of space meant for boxes and dust. I never went up there. I had no reason to. I moved in December. The snow fell constantly, dampening all noise. My days blended together, typing, making toast, pacing the kitchen, retyping. I lived alone, no pets, no roommates, no guests. Just silence, and I liked it. But in the second week, something shifted. It started with a feeling, not fear, not even unease, just discomfort. Like my body was reacting to something before my brain caught up. I'd wake in the dark, not from noise, but from stillness. My heart would be racing, my chest tight, my shirt damp. I'd lie there completely still, unsure what had triggered it. I assumed it was stress, too much screen time, too little sleep. But it kept happening, and it always came just before 3 a.m. Then one night, I caught it. It was faint, so faint I thought I imagined it. A low, rhythmic pulse in the air. Not loud, not distinct, but present, almost like a hum. I held my breath to isolate it, and I realized it wasn't mechanical. It was breathing. Long, slow, steady inhalations. A rhythm just unnatural enough to feel, separate from me. I sat up in bed. The sound was coming from above, from the attic. I didn't move for at least 10 minutes, just sat there, heart pounding, eyes fixed on the ceiling, listening. The breathing continued, in and out, not deep but regular, like someone sleeping or pretending to. Eventually, I got up. I crept into the hallway and stared at the attic door. The pull string swung gently. I didn't open it. Instead, I went back to my room and sat with the lights on until sunrise. The next morning, I convinced myself it had been the wind or an echo. Maybe I'd been asleep and dreamed the whole thing. But that night, it returned. Same time, same rhythm, louder this time. There was no wind, the heating was off, and I could feel the sound in my skin. That's when I understood something I'd never really thought about before. The body knows when it's being watched, even if the eyes are hidden. By the end of that week, I'd stopped pretending it wasn't happening. The breathing came every night, always between 2:45 and 3:10 a.m. Sometimes it stayed for just a few minutes, other times nearly half an hour. But no matter how long it lasted, I could never make myself move. I bought a motion sensor, set it in the hallway under the attic. It blinked randomly, but never triggered anything concrete. Then I downloaded a sleep tracking app, one of those programs that uses the microphone to log movement and sound. I set it every night, For 4 days, it recorded normal readings, rustling, occasional turning, and then long intervals of quiet. But on the 5th night, I saw it. There was a blank spot in the log. 12 full minutes missing. The app showed a gap starting at 3:03 a.m. The audio file simply stopped, then resumed at 3:15 with a sharp spike in ambient noise. No explanation, no system error. The app had functioned perfectly all night, except for those 12 minutes. I listened to the recording before and after. At 3:02, faint static, then silence. At 3:15, a sudden rustle, a loud creak, and my own voice, soft and groggy. What the hell? That was the last straw. I set up a camera, not a webcam, a real one. My dad had left me his old DSLR with a tripod and time-lapse mode. I aimed it at my bed, set it to shoot 1 frame every 30 seconds, left it running from midnight to dawn. I didn't sleep well that night. Every creak felt closer. I kept checking the door. The breathing came at 2:58 a.m. and lasted nearly 20 minutes. But when I checked the camera the next morning, I found 700+ frames. Most were boring. Me sleeping, changing position, covers shifting. But 1 frame, exactly at 3:04 a.m., was different. It was completely white, overexposed, as if someone had triggered the flash in complete darkness. The next frame, back to normal. Except my arm had moved. From under the covers to across my chest, I checked the camera. The flash wasn't set to fire. I never even woke up. But the image didn't lie. Someone, or something, had taken a photo of me in my sleep, and I had no memory, no dream, just 12 blank minutes. That night I pushed the dresser in front of the attic door, and still, the breathing came. I contacted the police a few days later. I showed them the audio files, the white frame, the camera. The officer who came was polite but unconvinced. He walked the house with me. We checked the attic together. I had to unfold the ladder myself. He waited. When we climbed up, it was empty. Just insulation, wooden beams, and a smell. Faint, but undeniable. Something like sweat and dust, lived in air. No sleeping bag, no food wrappers, no footprints. The officer shrugged and said I should install better locks. He didn't file a report, said there was no evidence of intrusion. But I know what I felt. A few nights later, I found a thread about it online, a forum for renters who'd experienced quiet tenants, the term used for uninvited, unnoticed people living in crawl spaces, garages, sheds. Some stories were brief. Some went on for months. One person said their tenant had memorized their daily routine and would only move when appliances were running. Another said the person used ductwork to crawl silently between vents. Most had never been caught. The posts all ended the same way. Something was heard, then seen, then gone. I left the house 2 weeks after the flash photo, but one thing stuck with me. I'd bought a second sensor for the bedroom, a temperature one, mostly to feel in control, to see the space respond. It tracked my room's temperature every minute, showed gradual drops at night, then steady warmth. Except on my last night, it logged a sharp dip. At 3:06 a.m., the temperature in the room dropped 7 degrees in less than a minute, then slowly returned. That night, I woke up gasping. The air was cold, the room still, and the door, the one I had locked and latched, was slightly ajar. No footsteps, no creaks, no breathing. But as I sat up, paralyzed, I felt it. Just one breath, warm, moist, directly behind me. And when I turned to face it, there was nothing, just the weight of something that had already left. I moved out the next day. But sometimes, even now, when I wake up between 2:50 and 3:10, I hold my breath and wait, just to see if the room will do it for me.